God is watching over Israel, and it's an amazing thing to be able to talk about this. And here to talk with us about the subject of the relationship between God and modern Israel is Rabbi Menachem Kohen. Welcome to Prophecy Watchers.
Thank you very much.
You know, I'm glad you're here from Israel. I'm glad that we get this opportunity to speak because we love Israel. We love modern Israel, the fulfillment of prophecy that we see there. And your book, Prophecies for the Era of Muslim Terror, really spends time defining the ways that God is watching over Israel. And it's a very good read. Thank you for producing it.
Thank you very much.
Let's talk about your book, and let's talk about, if you will, the way that God watches over Israel. And I want to start by asking you about something that you wrote concerning the time when Israel was absent from the land. Now, I suppose they weren't totally absent from the land for that 1800-year period after the Diaspora began, but they were mostly absent. And during that time, the land was not blessed, and you write about that, an 1800-year period. Tell us about that.
The Bible says in Leviticus, I'm going to make the land desolate so that even your enemies, nobody will be able to live on the land. And in Deuteronomy, the Bible says that the Shemayim, the heavens will be copper, and the earth below your feet will be iron. In other words, like they're being insulated. The sky is insulated. Mm-hmm. And the Bible continues by saying that there's not going to be rain. The Almighty will make the rain of your land dust and dirt. The only thing that will fall will be dust and dirt. And it's interesting because when I was going on a walk with one of my children, he just said, you know, here, meaning in Israel where we live, so he said that every single tree that you see is less than 120 years old. Every single tree that exists in Israel was hand planted by a person within the last 120 years because nothing grew. There were no trees in a country that was once fertile, that had luscious fruit and animals that were healthy, and I mean, it was just the contrast was unbelievable.
I don't think most people know about this. That they don't, or if they do, they don't think about it. That Israel, during a period, maybe from 200 AD to the present, roughly, Israel was parched, dusty. In fact, a lot of travelers from the West, from Europe and so forth, wrote about how bad it was. I'm sure you've heard about Mark Twain's journey. And he wrote eloquently about what a desolation that place was. And his opinion was that nobody will ever live here again. This is just gone.
It's beyond the level of probability when you stop to think that a fruitful property, the country called Israel, which was extremely fruitful, then suffers drought from the period of the Roman destruction, which is approximately the year 70, till like the year 1900. It's almost like 1800 years where nothing could grow. And then suddenly, like, you know, without explanation, without any scientific explanation, the rain started.
And ponds began to fill up. Having visited Israel and seen the lush tropical banana plantations and citrus fruit and so forth and so on, I'm just amazed. and because this is a relatively late development, and Israel is a supplier of fruits and vegetables to Europe,
Right.
which is amazing. But what this means and what you speak about in your book is that there is a relationship between God and Israel that's a special relationship.
That's true, and with regard to the drought, you see this because God says in several places that Vatem Hare Yisrael, you, the mountains of Israel, that are suffering drought, all of a sudden, Antachem Titenu, your branches are going to blossom, the fruits will come alive and provide. Why? Ki karvu lavo, because the Jews are coming back to the land. So in other words, during the period when most Jews were not living in Israel, there were Jews in Israel, but the vast majority were not. During that period, there was no rain. All of a sudden, now that the Jews are coming back, God says the land is going to become fruitful again.
And during that time, what I suppose is commonly known as the Diaspora, during that time, many Gentile nations tried to appropriate Israel. They call it Palestine. I guess the Romans named it Palestine. And today, even now, there are a lot of people who would like to call it Palestine rather than Israel. And there's some maps that are printed that don't even have the word Israel on them. Right. Some people are trying to get rid of the notion of Israel. But I wanted to read from Genesis 12 because the Lord spoke to Abram, and he said, "Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee." God took Abram to this place. "And I will make thee a great nation. I'll bless thee and make thy name great. Thou shalt be a blessing." Here's the part I wanted to get to. "And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed." So this is fascinating to me because God has promised that the whole world will be blessed through Israel. That's quite a statement, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And I believe that's the thrust of your book when you write about your book. I'm looking at, and again, Rabbi Cohen's book is called Prophecies for the Era of Muslim Terror, and we'll get to what that means in a little bit. But here in chapter 2, prophecy of deprivation, deficiency, and drought. Chapter 3, the prophecy of no one. What do you mean there when you say the prophecy of no one?
So it's an interesting phenomenon. Again, why is it interesting? Because even though the Bible talks about this, but like when it comes alive and you see it, so it becomes really exciting. So the Bible says that the land is going to become desolate. That's in Leviticus 26. Mm-hmm. The land will become desolate, that no one will live there, not even your enemies who are coming there because they want to conquer the country and they want to, live in it. So nobody, not your neighbors, not even your enemies who really desire that land, nobody will be able to live in the land because of the drought conditions. Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing is that there were entities that tried to settle the land, Crusaders, of course, Muslims in various periods, the Ottoman Turks, and nobody was successful. Actually, the Ottoman Turks were somewhat successful, which is why I call that chapter "Whoops," because in fact, it was in the middle 1500s that there were, I think around 300,000 Turks living in Israel, and more on the way. And but the Bible says, nobody's going to be able to live there. And here you see a prophecy being destroyed, but no. What happened was exactly what the Bible says. Nobody would be able to live there. And in the middle of the 1500s, earthquakes, locusts, and the locusts in this area, we're talking about trillions of locusts, that when they're able to change, because they're so dense, the number of locusts per square foot, that they change daylight hours into night. It becomes so dark. And of course, by the time they're gone, everything is destroyed. Every vegetation, there's nothing left. So again, we have drought conditions return, locusts, earthquakes, foreign armies.
Now, back to that plague of the locusts for a minute. That happened while the Turks were there.
Right.
And it sort of destroyed their plans, I suppose. Well, I wonder who sent the locust plague.
Yeah. That's it. There is something in Deuteronomy that refers to the locusts as well as the drought. But the bottom line is that's what God's prophecy was, that nobody means nobody. And so the land remained fallow, desert conditions, and just, again, several thousand Jews are living there continuously, but even they, they're dying, they're replaced by others, so there's always a presence, but it's not a place that you could really thrive in.
Yeah. Although there was a Jewish presence all the way through that period, that long, long period, almost 2 millennia, there was never a time when there were not Jews living there.
Correct.
Right? And they formed a contingent, a vanguard, really. And let's talk about that. They were students of the Bible. They clung to the land. They believed that essentially they believed in Bible prophecy. The
Right.
Jews would never be chased away from that land permanently.
That's correct. And you know what? There's an interesting aspect to this, which the Talmud points out, which even though we were focusing on the drought conditions, but the Talmud says, Zu midah tova. This is a very good thing, that there are drought conditions. Why? Because nobody's going to want to live there. So therefore, God says, when you come back to the land, you're not going to have to displace anybody.
And how true it was.
Yeah.
And we've talked about, right here on this program, we've talked about the return of the Jews to Israel. 1882, when 11 Jews from Kharkov in Russia came in. They settled a community around, I guess, what became Petah Tikva, which means in Hebrew, the gate of hope. What a wonderful name for the first Jews coming back. That's amazing.
That's also the period when, again, nobody had to be displaced, so it was easy for even the UN to say, or the League of Nations to say, yeah, sure, Israel, Jews, because nobody has to be displaced. But what's interesting is this is also the beginnings now of Bible prophecy during being realized and fulfilled in our lifetime, because which makes this very exciting, because what's happening is now, as the Jews are returning to Israel, so the land starts blossoming, and a lot of the prophecies that are foretold are now going to be realized.
You have in chapter 5 in your book here, the prophecy of rejuvenation. And let's talk about that just a bit, the idea of rejuvenation. Again, Rabbi Cohen's book is called Prophecies for the Era of Muslim Terror. It's a book that's very unlike many of the books that we offer here, because it's written by a Jewish resident of Israel about Israel from the perspective of the Jewish mind, and it's very, very fascinating to watch. And a moment ago, you were watching Rabbi Cohen reading from the Hebrew and translating into English. I love that because you're getting very close to what the Bible there in the Torah actually is saying. So continue along these lines. The prophecy of rejuvenation.
You have a prophecy, for example, in Amos.
And that would be, Amos would be Amos, as we could call it in English.
Okay. So here we have that the mountains are going to produce juicy fruit. And why? Because God says, Vishavti, I'm going to return the remnants of my people Israel, and they're going to build up the country with cities that were just desolate, and they're going to live there, they're going to plant, and they're going to eat, and I'm going to plant them on their land. And this is an interesting thing because God says, V'lo yinatshu od me'al admatam, that they will never ever be supplanted, uprooted from their land. This is their land, and they will live there. And as hard as others may try to remove them from the land permanently, wholesale fashion, it ain't going to happen, because this is the land that I gave them. This is the end of Amos.
Now, I'd like to ask you a sort of a personal question. You know, you living in Israel, and your congregations, when you teach, the people that you meet on the street every day, the Jewish population, are you and your population, your neighbors and your friends, conscious of these things that you write about? That is to say, is it an everyday conversation piece for you? Do you really believe that you're living in the last days and that maybe living in messianic times? What do you believe about these things?
Well, I think that the answer to your question is the people in Israel are different than the people who live elsewhere in the world, especially in terms of the Jews, because that's why they're living in Israel, because they understand there's something special happening, today that did not exist 200 years ago or before. So many people from all parts of the world, are traveling and moving to Israel because exactly that spirit is there that's awakened them. Although, and different people experience it differently, but essentially, the Jews who are living there, especially in contrast to the Jews who live, let's say the ones that I meet here in America or other parts of the country or the world, it's different. Most of the Jews who are living outside of Israel don't feel this awakening that you're describing.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. Let's go to chapter 6. And you use a phrase in chapter 6, the one real claim. And that's a theme. And again, I want to move sort of toward the title of your book, Prophecies for the Era of Muslim Terror, because there is a dark side to what's happening in the Middle East today, and there are other people who claim that that's their land. For example, the covenant of Hamas. They believe, and I remember the old PLO covenant going back to 1983, where they just are very firm in the idea that they own the land. They want the land is theirs. That's their claim, and you write about that, I think, very eloquently.
I'd like to emphasize two things. One from the Torah, from the Bible, and one just in the perspective of history. So you mentioned like the PLO, the Palestinian Authority, the successor to the PLO. So it's an interesting thing, because to understand what's going on, you need to go back to the 50s to see historically what happened. and it's extremely important. Arafat and Abbas are really from Egypt, and they were expelled from Egypt because they were subversive. They were planning to overthrow the government, so they were expelled from Egypt. Mm-hmm. Then the next thing is they go to Syria. They start murdering Syrian politicians, officials, and intelligence officers, and Syria makes war on them and expels them. So then they go to Jordan. And then, again, they start a revolution there. This has nothing to do with Jews. They start a revolution, then comes Black September, as it's known. I guess it was September 1970. Jordan wars against the PLO and kills at least, I think, if I remember it, like 10,000 PLO, and then expels, deports the rest of them, the survivors. They're not finished. Then they go to remember the Riviera in the Middle East?
Yes, in Lebanon.
They go to Lebanon, a gorgeous country, and they destroy it. Lebanon has never recovered. That's like 1975. Finally, Lebanese army, expels them, and they wind up somewhere in North Africa, maybe Tunisia, I think. Now they're going to decide they need a fifth war. They've got to figure out. So they decide they're going to go against Israel. But I mean, who are these guys? They're just a bunch of gangsters, just a power grab, looking for, well, I mean, it wasn't that they were really, this was their homeland. They just invented it, like, well, we'll try Egypt, we'll try Jordan, we'll try Syria, we'll try Lebanon, and then they got involved with Saddam Hussein in the invasion of Kuwait.
Yes.
I mean, so I just needed to respond, with the historical perspective, and now that I got carried away with it, I forgot your question.
Well, my question was, how do you feel about the one real claim, which is one of your chapter headings?
Yeah.
Because there are many claimants to Israel. There are many, many people who say, no, this is our land, and this is all going to be our land. There's ISIS now, or sometimes called ISIL, in which they lay claim to the Levant,
right,
which is all of the land all the way down from Lebanon all the way down to the river of Egypt, along the Mediterranean coast. And they say this is ours, and they are claiming, very sharply claiming, that this is ours.
It's an interesting point that the Talmud raises a rhetorical question. In other words, like, if the Bible is a book to guide us in life, through life, in terms of proper behaviors, so what does God start with creating the world? What does he start with the creation of the world? He should go straight into behaviors that you should do this, you shouldn't do this, you should be nice to, and stuff like that. Take care of people. Why is it starting off with that God created the world? So the Talmud emphasizes that the reason for this is to show that God is the real boss. He created the world, and he said that this land that I'm creating, which eventually is called Israel, is going to be destined for the Jews. That's it. And that's your claim. No other claim is as powerful as this. And it's interesting because every religious person, no matter what religion they are, they understand the Bible. Muslims also understand this. This is the land. And as a matter of fact, the Quran says, which is an interesting thing, because the Quran, which is not a user-friendly book for us as Christians and Jews, but the Quran says in two places that this land called Israel belongs to the Jews. That it's finished. The Quran says it. Christians say it. Jews say it. I mean, it's all based on here. So the Talmud says that's your proof. Don't go to with anything else. And the Talmud also says in a prophetic way that there is going to be a time when some people are going to accuse you, the Jews, of stealing their land. You should know they're the ones who stole your land to begin with, which is interesting because what's the Arab claim to Israel? That they once owned it. Well, had they owned it, they stole it from the Jews in 1948. They declared war, and the Jordanian army went and captured what's called the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and it was theirs. I mean, what do you mean it was theirs? It's not yours. You just stole it. So the interesting thing is that the one real claim for the Jews of Israel is the fact that God's the boss in this world, and he set people into places, and that's where you live.
Very interesting idea. Now, we watch from a distance as Christians in America, and I think many Bible-believing, and I emphasize that, Bible-believing Christians who read the Bible as divinely given, the Torah, the Tanakh, is the book, and we believe it was divinely given, as we believe the New Testament was also divinely given. But it's the whole thing, the entire Bible, and I want to pick up on something you said, because you talked about in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and that is the statement that sort of links everything together. And on that basis, then, it should be God who decides who lives where, because he's essentially built this place. He told Abraham to go there, and Abraham did, and Israel became a very, very special spot on planet Earth, the place where David built the first temple. There was a second temple there. There will be another temple. Wow, what can we say? It's amazing that all this has happened the way it has. Some of the modern miracles, to give people an idea of how God is watching over Israel. And in your book and in your lectures, you talk about a miraculous raid by the Israeli Air Force back in 1981. And it was conducted with F-16 aircraft. Let's talk about that and the miraculous nature of that mission, because the way you tell it is really remarkable.
Well, it's really not the way I tell it, it's the way God designed it. It's, you're selecting this to talk about, but, when I think about it, there are just so many miracles that have occurred that I could probably, lecture on it for days. I mean, it's just a I don't know the English word. It's like when it all gets together, it's just a whole big.
Yeah, the word that comes to my mind is confluence.
That's the word. That's the
Okay.
word. Yeah.
When things just come together miraculously.
And it's like, it's just no matter where you turn, it's everything. And everything that is ridiculous and whatever it is. But the point is, when I was a little kid, I really thought about a miracle being like I was on, like God taking a bird and changing it into a jet plane. That's a miracle. I was a little kid. Of course, the point is that that's not what a miracle is. What a miracle is that things occur within the rules of nature, of science, of math, but they're things that are unlikely, that are almost like improbable, but still possible. So I'll give you an example, and I think this was probably the most ridiculous thing that I ever heard. Carter became the president of the United States, and then he does the craziest thing. He tells the Shah of Iran to let Khomeini, who's a terrible man, promise to overthrow the Shah, and who's now in exile in France. So Carter demands that the Shah allow Khomeini to return to Iran. You know what that means? That means that he's going to start a revolution. And the Shah's, no matter what you think of him, but if he was a dictator, but a benevolent dictator, it wasn't a bad. Anyway, so that's what Carter demands. And so the Shah allows Khomeini to come back and then exit the Shah.
Right.
And sure enough, Khomeini comes in, and then we have the hostage crisis. We see already who he is. This is Carter? It's crazy. So, but that's the way history is written. That's the way God directs. Things happen, and you have to wait, see what's going on. Okay. Well, now the problem is, now that they have our hostages, so the State Department says, the Shah had ordered 83 planes. So we're not selling any planes to the Khomeini. Finished. In the meantime, Israel wanted planes. They wanted F-16s. Carter puts an embargo, places an embargo on Israel. Nothing is going to Israel. Israel says, at least sell us these fuel tanks, the spare fuel tanks. What Israel does very often for military purposes, their planes don't go that far and the enemy is far, so they use a spare tank to give the plane more distance. Mm-hmm. So he said, no, nothing. That's it. So, and Israel's, they know what they have to do. They can't do it. So then General Dynamics comes to the State Department and says, you can't do this. You have to allow us to sell the plane. We built 8. We have 8 F-16s here. We're going to be out millions of dollars. You have to let us sell to Iran. State Department says, you can't. State Department says, but you can sell them to Israel. So call up Israel. Can you use F-16s? Man, of course, 8 F-16s. So Israel says, only if you sell us the spare tanks, the fuel tanks. So they did. So Israel got 8 F-16s. Why did they need the F-16s? Because obviously everybody knew it, Saddam Hussein also, that his nuclear facility is going to be bombed by the Israelis. So the Israelis get these 8 F-16s, but even with the spare tanks, there's just no way they can make the trip. It's 1,200 miles about. It's just... Anyway, what happened is the following. They had a contingency plan, which was that the planes were not coming back. They were going to crash land into the water. That's it, and then they would try to rescue as many as they could. But anyway, it was that important. The survival of Israel is at stake. Saddam Hussein, with nuclear bombs, there's not going to be any Israel. There won't be any America either. So, in any event, what happened was that the planes took off and they flew over the Gulf of Aqaba. Who happens to be in the Gulf of Aqaba at this time? The King of Jordan, who's an ace pilot.
That's right. I'd forgotten about that.
So, and these planes are flying low to avoid the radar. They're flying so low that the king can see that they're Israeli planes. They're F-16s, but they're painted like Arab planes. He knows they're Israeli planes and they're going to Iraq. He knows it. He calls up command center. What's going on with these planes? So he said, no, not to worry. They're our boys. Because what was happening, the pilots purposely were talking in Arabic. The Israeli pilots were talking in Arabic with accents that they developed purposely for this trip to sound like Saudis or Egyptians or Jordanians. And so the command center said, not to worry, these are our boys. And so they continued on.
So a series of miraculous events, one upon another.
Wait, this becomes ridiculous. It's like, it could only happen if God wrote it. There's no way you could write this story. So number one, the planes didn't have enough fuel to make it back. It takes 9 minutes from the time the jets start the motors till they get to the point where they take off. That's 9 minutes worth of fuel. That's like another 100 miles you can go. So while the planes were ready to take off, they topped the tank, but one of the planes, something happened with his fuel intake, and they couldn't top him. So he's already nine minutes short. He's not going to make it. One of the planes, one of the F-16s, it was a mechanical failure, so they needed a substitute plane. The pilot had no experience with this plane. They all react differently. He's driving a plane he has no experience with. And then, again, it's only God writing this thing. Saddam Hussein knows that Israel's going to bomb this nuclear facility. So what does he do? He puts in a radar installation where the radars through computers are connected to the anti-aircraft weapons, right?
Yeah,
and so it's going to be precise shooting. Nobody has to shoot. The machines, the computers are going to do it all. So listen to this. The guys who are manning the radar station all go to supper at the same time. You would think they would eat in shifts. I mean, not only that, but the last guy out, it's only God who could write a story like this. The last guy out who's going to supper shuts off the computers. So, we have PCs, right? If you shut it off, you shut off your PC, your laptop, and then you put it back on, it takes
some time.
Sometimes.
You got to boot it up again.
Yeah.
Can
you imagine if you're dealing with these big radar machines and computers? How long it takes to get everything coordinated? It took 1:20 seconds for the bombing by the Israeli planes. By the time the computers were back on, the planes were already gone.
And no nuclear reactor. They had taken it out.
But yeah, and what's interesting, what's amazing is the precision. These planes are going. Every second that they fly, they're going 1/4 of a mile in a second. These planes, precision bombings. It's like, how could you do it? You're flying so fast. If you're off by a thousandth of a second, you're 30 feet away.
And they go by a circuitous route. They don't fly in a straight line. They have to fly in a secret route, which is even farther. And you, by the way, I've seen your talk on this, and it's really amazing. But now they're coming back.
Yeah, but the problem is that they're not coming back because they don't have enough fuel to. They don't have enough fuel to make it back to Israel.
Yeah.
So what again happens? Only God could do this. When I travel from the States to Israel, I can do it from New York. I can do it in 10 hours. But coming back takes me 12 hours. Why? Because the wind.
Mm-hmm.
The wind is pushing us going eastward. And against us when we're coming from Israel to the States. Well, what happened is God made a wind that blew the planes back to Israel.
So they actually made it back.
They made it back.
Much sooner than they thought.
Right.
But even then, after they landed, there's another detail.
Oh, yeah.
After they landed.
Yeah, what's amazing, again, what we're talking about is like one phenomenon after another. It's not possible for these things to happen. Anyway, what happens is, the pilots landed miraculously, and they shut off the engines. That's the procedure. They get out, and then the ground crew come in and they take the planes and do what they have to do. So the ground crew come in to each of the 8 planes, and not one of the planes could start. Each one suffered a failure, mechanical, electrical. Each one was different, but the bottom line is the planes landed and then finished. Another second, they couldn't have done it.
Right to the very end.
Yeah.
To me, that's like God speaking out loud and saying, you didn't do this, I did it.
Right.
He did it by a miracle, or a set of miracles.
Yeah, it reminds me of a song, just powerful. Bette Midler, I don't know the name of it, but it's probably, but in any event, the lyrics were, God is watching us at a distance.
At a distance.
At a distance.
I think he's closer than we imagine. Now let's talk about something else. By the way, we're talking with Rabbi Menachem Kohen, author of this book. It's called Prophecies for the Era of Muslim Terror. And it's just loaded with anecdotes, historical and contemporary, of how God has saved Israel miraculously a number of times, and how God essentially reacts when someone mistreats Israel. And I think it's something that is very instructive. I want to talk about the Scud missiles. Back in 1981, we all remember the sealed rooms where missiles were going to be fired on Israel. Israel was becoming prepared, and the fear, I think, was of poison gas. If a Scud missile landed in your neighborhood, it would explode, and your neighborhood would be flooded with poisonous gas. And so the Israelis all learned how to put plastic up and seal their rooms. And let's talk for a minute about what happened to those Scud missiles. How many of them actually fell?
Well, first I have to tell you that may have been the first reaction with the plastic, but you know, our apartments and homes actually have rooms that are specially designed to be hermetically sealed, to protect us should that ever occur where there is poison gas. Mm-hmm. It's a scary thing. I mean, every room is, just every day that you're there, you have a constant reminder that God is watching over us,
Yeah.
So the Scuds was a scary period of time. Because again, even though we know the end of the story, God says the Jews will never be uprooted. We're here forever.
Let's go back to the beginning of the whole Scud missile crisis. Who's firing those Scuds?
Okay. So what happens is that Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. So he decides to attack Israel with Scuds. He's also firing Scuds at our troops that are stationed in Saudi Arabia, because we're getting ready to invade Iraq. One Scud lands in Saudi Arabia at an American military base and kills 28 soldiers and wounds 98. But wound is not a scratch. It's important to note that had Israel not taken out the nuclear reactor 10 years earlier, these Scuds would have had nuclear bomb warheads.
Yes.
So, America needs to thank Israel. Israel needs to thank Israel. The world needs to thank Israel that they really took out that nuclear facility. But in any event, 10 years after the nuclear facility is taken out, so 93 Scuds are fired into Israel. Some were intercepted, about half were intercepted by the Patriot missile system, but some 43 got through. And eventually 39 landed in Israel itself. And 11,826 homes and apartments were destroyed. So we're talking about 39 Scuds destroying 11,826 apartments and houses, and not one Jew being killed.
What can you say?
Well, I said it. I mean, there is nothing to say. I mean, it speaks for itself. But wait, you have to hear the story. 11,826 homes and apartments destroyed, and a Scud lands in Saudi Arabia, and so many soldiers are affected. And here, 11,826, and not apartments, houses, and not one Jew. So this is a story. There are 11,826 stories. So I'll tell you about 10. 9 Scuds failed to detonate. Mm-hmm. Logical, not logical, but whatever. But there's still 11,000 homes. So one Scud lands in a shopping center, and why no Jews killed? The shopping center's closed. It's empty. One Scud lands on a factory, empty. One Scud lands on a park, empty. One Scud lands on a shelter, a bomb shelter. I mean, they're running for shelter. They know the Scuds are coming. For some reason, the people decided not to go into that bomb shelter. They went into another one.
They went to this other one.
Yeah, empty. A school. Why is it not? That day they were closed. The air conditioning didn't work. Empty. One Scud lands on the gas line in Gush Dan. Gush Dan is like near Tel Aviv. So that means, I mean, we know it landing on a gas line under Tel Aviv, the whole city. But you know the word, empty.
Empty.
Because the day before there was a gas leak, so you have to shut off the system and blow out the gas in order to do the repairs. Empty. 11,826 apartments and empty.
Now, you could go on this
Yeah.
way for a long, long time, and we're coming down to the last 3 minutes or so. You've told of 2 incidents with the Scud missiles, and the miraculous return of the F-16s. But you could tell, 100 more stories just like this, right?
Sure. The stories that we learned about in the Bible, you know, those things happened like a long time ago. And here, the same miracles are occurring, maybe on an even more grandiose scale. And this is something that we need to appreciate in terms of the times that we're living in and how God is taking care of us. So you know what it also means? It means that what God has promised us is true. We see it. So he also said, listen, guys, you got to behave. Because if you don't behave, so you know what? If we see the good stuff, we know it's coming true. And God says, listen, you got to behave and you can't do this. So you know what it means? Don't do it.
The book, Prophecies for the Era of Muslim Terror. And essentially, it's a compendium of modern miracles. It shows that miracles are happening today. We don't hear about it in the news. We don't often think about it, but it's happening right now. By the way, Prophecies for the Era of Muslim Terror, yours for $24.95. Go to prophecywatchers.com. Click on the online bookstore, and you'll find Menachem Kohen's book, which, by the way, is written from a very different perspective than a lot of books you'll read. It's written from the Jewish perspective in modern Israel. Along with this, if you'd like, we have a 6 DVD package called Against All Odds, Israel Survives. It's a long and very, very carefully produced DVD odyssey showing how God has miraculously saved Israel through a series of modern wars and crises of various kinds. The book, the DVD set together, $69.95. It's called the Prophecies of Israel package. And with that comes a copy, as with every order, by the way. When you order from prophecywatchers.com, you always get a free magazine. So, do so as soon as possible. Rabbi Kohen, it's been great having you here today. And thank you so much. Lord bless you.
Thank you.
I'm Gary Stearman. You keep watching. We're watching. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter, or follow us at facebook.com/prophecywatchers. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.